welcome grade 12 accounting students, or should I call you grade 12 accountants? Maybe that sounds a bit better. My name is Mahesh and I'm here today to assist you with your paper 2 revision. Right, a big thank you firstly to our sponsors Liberty for sponsoring this awesome show, and then obviously guys, I've mentioned this before, and please remember to download the Tenfold Education app because that's definitely going to assist you with your revision. Also remember to check out some awesome videos on YouTube at Mindset Learn. Right, so getting back to what my focus is for today's lesson. Obviously, I've mentioned we're looking at paper 2, right? And what exactly are we focusing on? We are focusing on some errors that students make, right? Common, because remember, as markers of your exam papers at the end of the year, these are errors that we often find while marking. And remember, the errors that you make, it really gets to us, it hurts us because we want to give you the maximum marks. So I'm hoping that by the end of today's lesson, you would have taken note of some of the errors that we pick up while marking your papers, and you are not going to make those mistakes when it comes to that November exam. Okay, right, so let's begin with firstly, in terms of reading through your papers, in terms of time allocation, let's emphasize the importance of that. So obviously guys, once you get your papers, once you receive your papers, there's nerves, right? You're obviously quite nervous. It's my final exam. What am I going to do if it's difficult? What if it's challenging? How do I approach this? The first thing to remember is you've got to remain calm. That's the number one tip. Right? Be calm. Remember, you've got this. You've written on this content before, on this section of work before. You had your June exam, you had your prelim, and now it's the third attempt on the same content. Okay, so you've got to stay calm. Then the second tip, please make sure that you maximize that 10-minute reading time. So read through your paper carefully. Remember that when it comes to interpreting information, there's a lot of emphasis on that. So accountants not only calculate, but they interpret, they analyze financial information, and then they provide suggestions to the owner. So read your information carefully. Then another tip, and I may have mentioned this in previous shows, but I'm going to repeat myself. Please make sure that when you're reading through your paper, you then decide as you're reading, I'm going to now begin with manufacturing, or I'm going to look at budgets, or maybe you're really good at recons and that's what you want to start off with. Remember, you don't have to complete question 1, question 2, question 3. Doesn't work that way in accounting. You may be most comfortable with question 3 and you can then begin with question 3. Okay, so 3 things that I want you to remember. Let's quickly just recap. Is obviously reading through the paper, deciding where you're going to begin with, remaining calm, and obviously bearing in mind that you've got a limited amount of time given. You've got sufficient time, not just limited, it is a sufficient time given, but please remember to consider the time allocated per question. Okay, right, now with that said, let's now move on to some specific sections. So I'm going to begin looking at manufacturing and some of the common errors that are made. Right, now the first common error, and again, might be a repetition, but this is important. When you are attempting a question on manufacturing, now remember, the common questions that are asked while practicing from your past papers, you would have noticed this, is the production cost statement together with certain notes. So you could be asked to complete the note for direct material cost, direct labor cost, factory overheads together with the production cost statement, or elements or calculations of the notes that I've just mentioned. Now, once again, I definitely did this in paper 1. Please make sure that you do not confuse the 2 financial years of information that will be provided. In other words, I'm referring to your opening balances and your closing balances. So with manufacturing, just as with cash flow statements, you will find that often opening balances, right, will be given for 2023 as well as 2022. So when I say opening balances, that's an error. I'm talking about balances in general, right? Not necessarily opening balances. So you will find that you will be given information, especially when it comes to raw material stock, right? What was your balance at the beginning of the year? Could be 10,000, end of the year 20,000, right? You will also be given information for finished goods, right? Or finished goods stock. What else? You get information on work in progress stock. You also are given information on indirect materials. Okay, so once again, please make sure that 2022, remember that's generally your opening balance. Okay, previous financial year becomes the opening balance for the current financial year. And obviously, the current financial year is always the closing balance. What was the balance at the end of the year, 2023? What was the balance at the beginning of the year, 2022? And again, remember, if you confuse these 2 amounts, right, you end up losing 2 precious marks. So I want you guys to take note of that. Okay, right, so there we go. There's an example that's given, so I'll touch on this very briefly, but I have explained it already. The following information was extracted from the financial records of CC Traders for the year ended 28th of Feb 2023. And as you can see, you've got raw material stock, work in progress stock, consumables on hands, which is your indirect material. So the first thing I do, I pick up my pen and I tell myself that is my opening balance of stock, and this is my closing balance of stock. Okay, you guys got that? Right, I'll go one step further. Opening balance, right, is always positive. Closing balance in case of stock is always seen as negative. So obviously when you're doing your notes, this is what I'm referring to. Okay, so let's just show you with an example. Right, there we go. So direct material stock. So balance at the beginning of the year, right? So raw material stock, right? Balance at the beginning of the year, 2022, 35,000. So 35,000 is my balance at the beginning of the year, and as you can see, it's positive, right? I'm not using brackets. Balance at the end of the year is normally towards the end of the note, right? And this is where balance at the end of the year must be in brackets. Okay, so end of the year, an amount of 20,000. That's how much of stock, right, was on hand at the end of the year. So as you can see, I'm not going to lose any marks there. Okay, right, now with factory overheads, let's see here how important this is. I think in terms of factory overheads, I just want to quickly fill in additional information here. So indirect material, right? Okay, that was purchased for the year. Let's give you an amount. So let's make it 35,000, right? Remember, this is additional information that I didn't include, but obviously it will be included in your exam. And I know you guys know what I'm talking about. Right, so in terms of the calculation, indirect material, factory overheads, right? So you're going to start off with balance at the beginning of the year. So consumables on hand, indirect materials at the beginning of the year, 25,000. Okay, so opening balance. To this, you now adding whatever you have purchased. Okay, so for the year, indirect materials that were purchased, an amount of 35,000. So plus 35,000. And to this amount, you obviously now subtracting minus closing balance. So minus at the end of the year on hand, indirect materials amounts to 5,000. So minus 5,000. And now I can work out what was used. Okay, what exactly was my expense for the year. Okay, right, so indirect material expense for the year. Let's pull out our calculator. So I just want to quickly clear that. Right, so we've got 25,000. To this, we adding what we purchased, 35,000, and then minus the 5,000, and that gives us an amount of 55,000. And this is what I then show in the note. So in terms of mark allocation, I would say 4 marks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that line alone worth 4 marks. But if you mix up the opening balance and closing balance, this is what some students do. So they will start off with the 5,000, which is clearly wrong, plus 35,000, okay? So they'll get a mark there, and then they will say minus 25,000, which is obviously incorrect, and clearly the answer will be incorrect as well. So as you can see, right, the students just getting 1 mark, right? Sometimes there is a method mark there that is given, okay? But as you can see, you've lost 2 precious marks just by confusing your opening balance from your closing balance. So please, guys, just make sure you don't do that. You don't mix the two, okay? Right, then the next error that I want to point out, I think even before moving to that error, and while we are on the conversation of the notes, now that I've got factory overheads in front of me, I've just remembered one error that students often make when they are completing this note, and I want you to take heed of this error. Please, guys, when you are calculating the production cost statement, remember, what am I ultimately calculating? I am looking at a combination of expenses that I have incurred in order to manufacture products, right? What was my total expense in terms of direct material, right? Direct labor, as well as all my indirect factory expenses, which obviously we call factory overheads. And that will give me my total cost of production. Okay, now, why am I emphasizing this? Because again, you're saying, but Mahesh, we know this. Why? Because this is what students do, guys. This is what you guys do. Here, we're obviously looking at a whole lot of expenses, okay? Because we're calculating a cost. What's a cost? It's an expense. What we often find students do, and often it is here at this point in time when they're calculating factory overheads, they end up showing or including certain assets in this expense note. Okay, so what assets am I referring to? You could get an adjustment about machinery where we could, let's just quickly make up an adjustment because this is important. So the business purchased, right, let's say new machinery. Okay, so new machinery for an amount of 10,000 Rand, right, on, let's quickly make up a date, on the 1st of Feb 2023, and then they also tell you depreciation is calculated at 20% on cost. Okay, Right, so this is a year-end adjustment that is given to you. Now, in terms of the information given to you, what students will often do is purchase new machinery, 10,000 Rand, right? When they now calculating the factory overhead note, right? Remember, this is obviously expenses. In this note, they will then show us machinery, 10,000 Rand. Okay, and this is incorrect. Why is it incorrect? Because that machinery that you purchased is an asset. It is not an expense. That belongs in the balance sheet in your fixed asset note. So this amount is what we call a foreign item. It's not really supposed to be there, right? So this amount is incorrect. What should be included? What is the expense? The expense is the depreciation for the year. That is your expense. So your depreciation, right? Let's quickly calculate your depreciation. So 10,000 is my cost. So that's my amount times the rate, 20%. And the time that you've used this or you've owned this equipment for, let's assume the financial year ends on the 28th of Feb 2023, right? So I've only used it for 1 month. I've only owned it for 1 month, and it's going to depreciate by that 1 month. Okay, so I've got 10,000 times 20%. And then divide that by 12 because it's only 1 month. I'm going to get a decimal there, right? So it's an amount of 166 Rand, and that is my depreciation, 166. Okay, so this is the amount that you are now showing in your income statement, in your note, the factory overhead note. Okay, right, I just wanted to touch on that because again, it's an error that students make, and it's important that you guys don't make this error. Okay, I think as I'm doing this note, it's coming, I'm thinking of all the errors that you guys make and I may have not included in my slides. Right, okay, so let's move on. Then, when it comes to your year-end adjustments, now remember guys, yes, you do come across year-end adjustments when you're doing paper 1, the income statement, but you also have year-end adjustments in manufacturing that you also need to consider when preparing the factory overhead note or other notes such as direct material and direct labor. Okay, so what do I want to highlight in terms of year-end adjustments? Students allocate expense to the various cost accounts before taking into account the year-end adjustment. Right, so in order for me to explain this further, I want to dive straight into a question. So the example that I've given you, I've got an extract from the pre-adjustment trial balance on the 28th of Feb 2023. Oh, guys, I think before we carry on, let's take a quick break. I kind of forgot to take a break. So let's take a break and we'll be back soon.